Hello, I'm very glad to be back in Malta. I was here a year ago, and I had hoped to be able to have another woman from my organization, another one of our international pro life speakers, Jennifer Christie, but unfortunately, she's ended up with the flu, and she's very disappointed that she's not here right now. I do hope that in the future you'll be able to have that opportunity to hear her share her story. She is a mother who became pregnant by rape. She was married and raped while on a business trip, and she has a very strong message. I would like to address a few different things today. I, Besides being conceived and raped myself and an attorney, I also am the founder and president of Save the One, a global pro life organization made up now of over 525 like me, mothers from rape, like me, conceived in rape, and like Jennifer Christie, mothers from rape, and women who are post abortive who regret aborting after rape. And then we also help defend the so-called difficult cases in the abortion debate. So we have hundreds from our Carry to Birth division, parents who were given a challenging prenatal diagnosis and told to abort. But besides being involved in that organization, I also co-founded Embryo Defense. And that is another global organization. And our goal with Embryo Defense was to do similarly what we did with Save the One, which is to help people get their stories out. I represented the mother in Michigan's frozen embryo case from 1997 to 1999. It was the first in Michigan and the third in the nation. My client, the mother, was seeking to have her 5 unborn children protected. She had a son who was conceived in the same grouping, and this was not a theoretical concept for her, but she looked at her son every day and realized that he could easily have been one of the 5. However, her ex-husband wanted her 5 children, sons and daughters, destroyed. We were likely to win the first case. On appeal, we had a very strong Court of Appeals pro-life in Michigan, as well as the Michigan Supreme Court. However, she disappeared on appeal because her ex-husband was then fighting to see her child that was conceived in the same grouping, and he hadn't seen him in several years, and all of a sudden now it was clear that he wanted to see their son as retribution, and she wanted to protect him. And when she realized that the court was poised to give him unsupervised visits after a 1.5-year battle, she suddenly disappeared, and the court found out, and they said it was inappropriate to rule under those circumstances. And sadly, since then, all across the United States, there have been many court battles. And in every instance except for one, the courts ruled against the embryos. And they ruled that they either were to be destroyed or to remain frozen, which means that they'll die that way. There was one case out of Illinois with a mother who had cancer, and this really was her only opportunity to be able to have any more children. And so even though that was actually traditionally considered a liberal state in the United States, the courts ruled in her favor in that circumstance. But in all the rest of the states, regardless of what the contract said, like in my case where the mother's the only one who signed any of the contracts with her fertility clinic, the fertility clinic still would not allow her to be able to have her own embryos. And in my co-founder's case, Halessia McQueen in Missouri, they had an agreement that if they divorced, that she would be able to have the embryos and to be able to make decisions for them. And of course, she thought that she was being responsible. She was Catholic, just like my client was Catholic, and they thought, well, they just assumed, well, the church's guidelines against IVF were for people who wouldn't respect life, but I respect life, and I had this agreement, and they felt that they had control over their embryos and they wouldn't be putting them in jeopardy. But what ended up happening, Halessia's case went all the way up to the state Supreme Court of Missouri, and they completely went against what the contract said. And so her embryos remain frozen at this time. And now her only avenue is to try to change the law of Missouri. And Missouri actually has in their constitution protection of the unborn from conception. Yet this is allowed. And it's interesting because when it comes to embryos, I mean, you're not talking about a woman's body. And yet they're still ruling against life and against what the parents agreed contractually. So we formed Embryo Defense because I've realized that in speaking to legislators, you start talking to them about frozen embryos and their eyes glaze over. And as if you're still talking about some sort of futuristic technology when this has been in practice around the globe for several decades now. People cannot relate to the concept of an embryo. But what they can relate to is the heart of a mother or a father for their children. And so that's just like what we did with Save the One, where we tell real stories so that people can relate, so that the child conceived in rape is not merely just a concept for philosophical discussion. Same thing with embryo defense. We wanted to get these stories told of mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, so that this is not merely just a concept up for philosophical discussion. It's very important that you continue to protect life from conception. There is a movement around the globe that want to see embryos used for experimentation. They think that this is as if they're property, not persons. And this is how the courts are treating them, as property, not persons. And this is not how we treat human life. I mean, this is callous. This is actually from antiquity. This is barbaric. This is going backwards in time when the law around the world used to treat children as property. And we had stopped doing that. We stopped doing that with slavery. We stopped doing that with the way we treat women. That people are not property and they are deserving of dignity. And so it's very important in Malta here that you continue to respect life right from the moment of conception. Now, I'll tell you that in the frozen embryo case that I had, the doctors testified at deposition. The IVF doctors testified that from the moment of conception, they are living human beings. And they, in fact, each have a gender. So we're not talking about an it. It is a very dehumanizing term, although I understand that just as in war, it is easier to kill the enemy when you dehumanize them. But they are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. They have a gender. We each have a gender right from our beginnings. And furthermore, when the doctors talked about them being alive, I explained to people who somehow think that embryos aren't alive. First of all, when they introduce the egg and the sperm, they can't create life. All they can do is facilitate life. They introduce the egg and the sperm, and then 24 hours later, they go back to see how many have been created. And then they have to ascertain in that petri dish which ones are living and which ones are dead. Because as you can imagine, in such an artificial environment, not all of them make it. And so some of them are dead. They have to make sure that they only take the living human beings and transfer them to a woman's womb or freeze them if they weren't going to be transferred right away. And it's sad that there's super ovulating women taking 25 to 30 at a time, which is not healthy for women. I actually had a friend who died from ovarian cancer after multiple treatments of IVF before she finally ended up adopting. We're experimenting on women with all of these treatments, super ovulating them. And then you have a problem in the United States with women being exploited where, they can pay their room and board for a year of college by using, by selling their eggs. And there's a movie called Exploitation, and there's a follow-up to that shows how destructive it is. So, that's the one issue I wanted to talk about very quickly. There's also a law that I worked on last year when I was here. I met with some legislators, and it's called the Rape Survivor Child Custody Act in the United States. President Obama signed it. It's to terminate the parental rights of rapists. We looked at the way that Maltese law is structured and worked out some language. And I was excited to see, I got a Google alert, that this law was being introduced in Malta. In fact, it wasn't actually introduced. It was proposed by the legislators, one particular legislator, to get it introduced as part of a current package on gender-based violence and domestic violence bill. It's bill number 14. And ultimately what happened is that it did not get adopted into this bill. Right now, the bill is on its second reading, and it is not too late to get this law introduced. It's very important when you have a law like this to have it as part of a package, because for legislators to take this up on their own without being part of a package, they oftentimes feel like, well, why do I want to waste time on just this one small issue? So it's very important to push for this right now. It's estimated in the United States that there's 32,000 rape-related pregnancies every year. Between 4 to 6% of rape victims become pregnant. So if you want to estimate how many become pregnant by rape in Malta, look to see what your numbers are of not how many rapes are reported, but how many rapes are estimated to actually occur in Malta every year. You'll get an idea of how many babies there are. The mothers and their children deserve to be protected from the rapist. This law is pro-life in effect because if women know they'll be protected, they'll be more likely to choose life. But this is a law that in the United States, Democrats, Republicans all got behind. It's been passed unanimously in many states. I've worked on it the last couple of years, state after state, we've been getting it passed unanimously. So I would really like to see an effort, get this in the news, and get this law passed here, because these women deserve to be protected and their children deserve to be protected from the rapist. Rapists should not have parental rights.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, all of you, for joining us, and we wish to extend the invitation to join us for the Candlelight March for Life once again, Saturday, 9th December, 5 o'clock in front of Castile. Thank you.